There are many kinds of demo effects in the world. One kind that's mostly a thing on old school platforms is the seemingly impossible effect. These have a lot in common with magic tricks. You know you're being deceived, and part of the fun is trying to figure out how and what's really going on. In the spirit of this tradition, my Commodore 64 Demo 9 is framed like a stage magic performance. It's got a little wizard doing increasingly impressive tricks with 9 sprites on a machine that can only display 8 of them. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the demo yet, you should. It's only 3 minutes, it's on YouTube, and there's a link in the video description. You can also download the demo and watch it on a real C64. Now, for an experienced C64 scener, there's really only one part of 9 that looks impossible. And in this video I'm going to reveal exactly how that part works. But first I'm gonna take you through some of the lesser effects, because in this demo, like in a magic show, nothing is what it seems. We'll start with a quick recap of what the C64 can do to get a feeling for the limitations of its graphics chip, the VIC-2. The main text area is 40 by 25 characters, and it can move slightly, just enough to let you implement scrolling games with tile-based graphics. It can operate in different modes, like text or bitmap, but you're always limited to this 40 by 25 character rectangle. You can, of course, change what is displayed in the main text area over time, but as a general rule, the 1 MHz processor in the C64 isn't fast enough to animate graphics or move things around the screen smoothly. So, in addition to the main text area, you can enable up to 8 hardware sprites. These are small graphical objects, 24 by 21 pixels in size, that can be positioned anywhere on the screen. They can be X expanded, Y expanded, or both. And when you expand, you still get 24 by 21 pixels, but the pixels get bigger. Sprites are either in high resolution mode with a single bit per pixel, or multicolor mode with 2 bits per pixel. Multicolor mode gives you more colors, but only half the horizontal resolution. Here are the 9 swirling spirits from the demo, and we can distinguish 24 by 21 small square pixels in a single color, so these appear to be high-resolution unexpanded sprites. And yes, if you freeze the demo on any video frame, the digits always look like this. They're always in high resolution. Finally, there's the border. The border goes in front of everything, and it's there to help you make scrolling games where enemies appear gradually from the edge of the playfield. So, text area, 8 sprites, and the border. That's essentially what the C64 hardware gives you, according to official documentation. As you can imagine, it would be straightforward to implement this demo with 8 swirling spirits instead of 9, so long as they also remained within or behind the border. If you just ignore those pesky impossible details, the demo looks deceptively simple, like a beginner's programming exercise, which could lead you to think that it must also be simple on the inside. But nothing could be further from the truth. In addition to the documented behavior of the VIC chip, I have to mention 2 important undocumented features. Number 1, people have discovered a hack to make the border go away. And this lets you see the sprites behind it, but you still can't move the text area very much, so whenever you see colorful, detailed graphics towards the edge of the screen, you know it's got to be made with sprites. The second undocumented feature is a hardware bug, really. It's called idle mode graphics, or just idle graphics, and it fills the space above and below the text area. This space is usually covered by the border, but we can get a glimpse of it by moving the text area down as far as it goes, like this. Now you can see some garbage visible in the gap, and this garbage is called idle graphics. It's a repeated pattern of 8 black or transparent pixels overlaid on the background color. The pattern itself is determined by a specific byte in memory nicknamed the ghost byte. This is always the last address that the VIC chip can fetch pixels from, and that's normally address 3FFF, or 16383 in decimal. So we can change this byte and set the repeating pattern to anything we want, even fully black, or as people usually do, fully transparent. Idle graphics is mostly an annoyance, but sometimes it can be useful, as we shall see. So let's start from the beginning. The introductory part sets the stage by reinforcing the plain and familiar aesthetics of the basic home screen. This is like a magician using a clean desk and everyday props to make you think you know what's going on. we can see that the default ROM font is being used and the wizard is drawn with graphical characters from that font, so-called Petsky graphics. And while that's in part a stylistic choice, it's also deceptive. The audience is led to believe that the wizard will always be rendered in text mode using character graphics from the ROM font, and that assumption is false. The 9 sprites appear, but so far you're looking at a perfectly mundane thing called sprite multiplexing. And if you've ever played a C64 game with more than 8 things moving around on the screen, you've seen it. The idea is to reuse sprite hardware while the video frame is being rendered. As each frame is generated from top to bottom, the CPU can sync up with the video beam and change the hardware registers on the fly. In this case, I start by telling the hardware to display all digits except the one at the very bottom of the circle. And then I make the CPU wait until the video chip has finished rendering the topmost digit. At that moment, I reprogram the registers for that hardware sprite to render the remaining digits. But now something interesting happens. The sprites are moving into the border area, but they go in front of the border instead of behind it. This means the border must have been opened using the hack I mentioned earlier. Opening the side border requires perfectly timed code, so the programming here is more complicated. But I don't want to get bogged down in implementation details at this point, because we haven't reached the impossible part of the demo yet. What you see here is the sort of thing C64 demo coders do before breakfast. What I will do, however, is to briefly take you through what's actually on the screen, because this is an excellent example of things that aren't what they seem. In fact, at this point in the demo, the main text area is completely turned off, and you're only looking at sprites. You see, the wizard graphics have been designed to be renderable either with Petsky characters or with 2 hardware sprites. If you multiplex a bunch of sprites on top of each other like this, and expand them in the x direction, and then you have another stack of sprites that looks like this, and then you use timed code to change the sprite colors in a couple of places, and you move the 2 stacks on top of each other like so, then you get exactly the same wizard. Again, I won't go into the specifics of why this is helpful, except to say that it simplifies the timing, which in turn lets me open the side borders in this part of the screen. That exposes the blue background color, so 2 vertical stacks of solid black X-expanded sprites are needed as a cover. Together, these 4 static sprite columns help to stabilize the DMA timing of 3 freely moving sprites that are used for the actual multiplexing. And 3 physical sprites is enough to cover the 9 digits when the circle is this wide and sparse, but as the circle shrinks, I have to seamlessly switch back to regular multiplexing. And now for something completely different. The circle is flattened until all 9 digits line up horizontally. They're covering the same raster lines, so they're active simultaneously. How is that possible, since we only have 8 hardware sprites? Well, this one is easy. One of the digits is drawn with character graphics. So in this part of the demo, the wizard is indeed rendered as text, but so is the digit that's currently at the far back. It's drawn with 3x3 characters from a custom font, and I fine position the text area as you would do in a scrolling game, and then I reset the scrolling registers further down the screen when it's time to render the wizard. If I disable the code that cleans up the previous digit, you can see how it's done. So, taking a step back, what appears to be a single continuous effect is produced with radically different methods at different times. And that's another technique borrowed from the art of magic. The different implementations provide alibis for each other, like all the digits can't be sprites because they line up horizontally, but if they're not sprites, how can they go into the border area? It must be magic. But now we're approaching the truly impossible looking part, where all 9 high-resolution sprites enter the border area and line up horizontally at the same time. Once again, things are not what they seem. One thing you should have been asking yourself throughout the demo is this: why on earth is the border black? Sure, it looks good, but I also told you that I lean on the standard basic screen to lure the viewer into a sense of familiarity. So why not leave the border at its default light blue? And of course there's a good reason for that. Do you remember something I've mentioned that is always black? That's right, the idle graphics pattern, the ghost byte. Clearly the vertical border is open in this part, so we're looking at the sprites and background that would otherwise be hidden by it, and overlaid on the background is the idle graphics, this black pattern of 8 repeating pixels. But what possible use is a black pattern of pixels against a black background? Well, absolutely no use at all, but you see, the background isn't black. Have you also noticed something odd about how the sprites move in this part of the demo? Before, they were dancing around independently in sine waves, but now, for part of the cycle, they move together like a scroll text. Can you see it? This is what you're actually looking at. Out of the 9 digits, only 6 are regular sprites. 2 of them are used normally, 4 are actually extended vertically using a technique called sprite crunch to cover a larger area. The purpose of this is to stabilize sprite DMA timing, just as I did with multiplexed columns of sprites back in the side border part. Using sprite crunch instead shaves off a few clock cycles in a critical part of the effect code. Now, the pixel contents of these tall sprites have to be updated by the CPU on every frame to make the digits travel up and down. And this might seem like an overcomplicated approach. Sprite crunch is notoriously tricky to get right, and now the CPU has to spend most of its time shuffling pixels around in memory. But I can assure you that the alternative, with 6 freely moving sprites, would have been far more complicated to work with. We need 100% stable DMA timing for what is to come. And hold on to your wizard hat, because now we get to the good part. The remaining 3 digits are rendered using 2 sprites that work together and move together as a single unit that I'll refer to as the device. And there's more to the device than the 2 sprites, but we'll get to that. Now, in order for 2 sprites to cover the full width of 3 digits, they have to be horizontally expanded. And in order to display 3 differently colored digits, they have to be in multicolor mode. Both of these configuration choices make the pixels wider, so we should be looking at quadruple width pixels here. So why don't we see blocky stretched out graphics? Well, it turns out that we are looking at blocky stretched out sprites. They look something like this. And because we're in multicolor mode, each blocky stretched out pixel is either transparent or one of 3 colors. In this case, the leftmost sprite uses the 3 colors light green, yellow and black, and the rightmost sprite uses yellow, orange and black. And what is visible through the transparent pixels? What is behind the sprites in the upper border area? That's right, idle graphics. And idle graphics consists of the ghost byte at address 3FFF repeated over and over in black. But we can change the contents of this memory location occasionally as we go. And that's also part of the device. So while the video chip is rendering these 2 sprites in the upper border area, the CPU is executing timed code to update the ghost byte to get a different repeating pattern on each raster line. And now watch very closely what happens when I move the repeating ghost byte pattern underneath the blocky sprite graphics. As you can see, the idle graphics pattern supplies all the missing high-resolution detail. This technique has a name, it's called ghost byte shine through, but of course this doesn't work with arbitrary graphics. The 9 swirling spirits, the 9 digits that you've been looking at this whole time, have been carefully crafted from the beginning to make the illusion possible. And if you thought some of the digits were a bit funny looking, this is the reason. All the curved high-resolution shapes have to be in common locations, so in each part of the ghost byte pattern, all digits are either curved in one particular way, or fully on or fully off. Ghost byte shine through is an established technique, but I'm using it in a novel way in this demo, and what's more, it doesn't explain everything. Specifically, if the background isn't black, what color is it? And I know the terminology is confusing, we're looking at 9 colorful digits surrounded by black, but technically black is used as a foreground color, both in the sprites and in the ghost byte pattern. So technically, the background color ought to be whatever color the digits have. But here the digits have different colors, so we have to, as the jargon goes, split the background, meaning that we update the background color register as we go, and we do that on every single raster line in time with the video beam. And that's not particularly difficult as such, but there's a twist. And for a seasoned C64 coder watching the demo, this may well be the truly baffling part. Because look, here we have 3 digits of different color, very close to each other. Each digit is 24 pixels wide, followed by a gap of 8 pixels, and together that corresponds to exactly 4 processor clock cycles. But the fastest way to update the register in the video chip is with the 4-cycle store instruction. And there are 3 such instructions for storing the A, X, and Y processor register, respectively. For completeness, there is also the undocumented SAX instruction to consider, but I'll spare you the trouble and just say that it won't help us with this particular problem. And the problem is this. If we have to update the background color register every 4 cycles, but the store instructions take 4 cycles, then there is no time to load new values into the processor registers between the stores. But if we start over here with a black background color to hide the idle graphics pattern, we would then have to store the color of the first digit, then 4 cycles later the color of the second digit, and then the color of the third digit, and then finally black again. That's 4 different values, but we only have 3 processor registers. As if that wasn't impossible enough, there's another obstacle. The clock cycle boundaries are fixed on the screen, but the sprites are moving smoothly. So the background splits need 8 pixels of leeway, which is provided by the gaps between digits. We can use black sprite pixels to cover up the splits, but that still leaves one of the splits exposed. The sprites simply aren't wide enough to cover 4 splits, only 3 of them. So how can we overcome both of these obstacles and squeeze the necessary color changes into such a tight schedule? The solution is, first of all, to black out the screen using a different technique, and to do it using a value that's already in one of the processor registers. So again, we have 3 CPU registers, A, X, and Y, and they all contain arbitrary color numbers. But color numbers on the C64 are 4-bit values, because there are only 16 colors to choose from. And that means the upper 4 bits are ignored by DO21, the background color register, so now we have to find some other hardware register where the lower 4 bits are ignored and the upper 4 bits can make the screen go black. And there is such a register, and it's the good old DO11. Under normal circumstances, the lower bits of DO11 trigger all sorts of interesting behavior in the VIC chip, but not in the vertical border area. So as long as we're up in the border, we can write anything we want to the lower bits of DO11. The upper bits, on the other hand, control the current video mode, and there are so-called invalid video modes that turn the screen black. But invalid video modes are not the answer this time, because although they would address the first problem, which is to perform the necessary register updates using only A, X, and Y, we still have the second problem, which is that the sprites aren't wide enough to cover all the splits. But there is a way. We can use the upper bits to select a video mode called Extended Character Mode, ECM. Remember, nicknamed the ghost byte. This is always the last address that the VIC chip can fetch pixels from, and that's normally address 3FFF. But ECM imposes restrictions on where pixels can be fetched from. And this actually moves the ghost byte to address 39FF. And in that location we've prepared the value FF for an all-black idle graphics pattern. The change in video mode is instantaneous, just like the background color splits, but the new ghost byte pattern will be delayed by the pixel pipeline. That's because the VIC chip has to fetch the ghost byte and then delay it by a variable amount depending on the current horizontal scroll position, which is under our control. So by manipulating the horizontal scroll position, the change in idle graphics pattern can be aligned with the left edge of the first digit. And this very neatly eliminates the need to cover up a split on the left-hand side of the device. So in summary, at the start of each raster line, the screen is blacked out by the all-black ECM ghost byte at 39FF. At our leisure, we now set the background color to the color of the first digit and prepare 3 values in the CPU registers. Then we execute 4 store instructions in rapid succession. We store the first value to DO11 to select the regular ghost byte at 3FFF. This will be delayed according to the current horizontal scroll position, so the new pixels will line up with the left edge of the first digit. Then we store the same value again to DO21, this time using the lower bits to switch to the color of the middle digit. Then we store the second value to DO21 to select the color of the rightmost digit, and finally we store the third value to DO21 to make the background black again. Then we have a bit more time to switch back to ECM mode and get ready for the next raster line. I've glossed over some details. The actual routine has to deal with different versions of the VIC chip with different delays in the pixel pipeline. And there's a special case when write cycles in the timed code coincide with the start of sprite DMA. But the unabridged version of the code is available in a machine code monitor near you. There is one thing left to clarify. As I mentioned, this trick relies on the lower 4 bits of DO11 being ignored in the border area. But in the demo, the device moves seamlessly between the border and the text area. How does that work? And the answer is again that just as in a Magic performance, what looks like a single effect can be produced in several different ways. And the part of the device that dips down into the text area is much easier to implement. Here we can emulate the idle graphics pattern using regular characters, and we can use ordinary color RAM instead of splits. And the transition between the two implementations is triggered at just the right moment by placing a return from subroutine instruction at the proper offset in the unrolled raster code. With that, I conclude my explanation of the illusions of 9. The rest is just hours of coding, optimizing and polishing until it looks clean, simple, effortless, and utterly impossible. Take care and keep up with the Commodore.